So to make things easy to follow, I'm going to start off by making the legs. Well, the lower legs to be more specific. And what you've seen me do is start breaking down the boards into more manageable pieces. We got this 8/4 walnut from our local lumber dealer, Woodworks, that's already planed down nicely since we don't have any fancy milling equipment. We also don't have a joiner to clean up these rough edges on the side, but luckily they have a machine that takes care of that in one single pass. But real quick, let me walk you through how this table's going to go together though. So here's the finished table. Well, actually a 3D representation of one. We'll get to the tabletop later, so let's get rid of that for right now. We are left with 2 pairs of legs and 2 stretchers. Ah heck, let's get rid of those stretchers too. Okay, so now we just have the legs. Now it'd be sweet if we could make these legs out of one solid piece of walnut, but that's not going to happen for a multitude of reasons. Because of that, these legs are going to be broken down into some parts. The upper leg and the lower leg. Then we will make a mirrored set and join all 4 pieces to make one, let's call it, Legosaurus. These 2 Legosauruses get connected by some stretchers and then toss a top on there and the project is finished. But you probably came here to see how it's actually built, so I guess I can jump back to that. With the boards for the lower legs broken down to their rough size, I could set up a stop block on our crosscut sled and break the board down to its dimensions that are in the plans that we made for this table. And if you do want those plans, they're linked down in the description below. And unlike me trying to set up the stop block, those plans have all the kinks worked out and guide you step by step through the process of making this table with all the dimensions and detailed drawings. With the length dialed in, I pulled out the width fence and cut the blanks for the lower legs to the width I needed, which is 5.5 inches. Each of these blanks will provide me with 2 legs. Here's where we get to a challenging part though. I'm not actually measuring the roughly 4-degree angle to cut these tapered legs. Instead, I'm marking the endpoints. I grabbed our DIY joiner and taper jig, which we have a full build video linked below, and lined the marks I just made up with the edge of the sled. This is effectively the same as connecting the marks with a line and then cutting to that line. With the clamps holding the blanks securely to the sled, I could run it through the saw to create the tapered leg that I'm after. The sweet thing about this is that after I cut the first leg, I can remove it, flip the cutoff stock around, and run that back through the table saw to get a perfectly identical leg. You know the old saying, right? Measure once, cut 4 times. With all 4 identical legs cut down, I need to start marking out another weird angle of like 69.6 something degrees. And the most accurate way to make repeated cuts at such a strange angle like this that I know of is to use the table saw. So I clamped down a scrap piece of plywood to my crosscut sled and ran it through the table saw to create a reference line where the blade is going to cut. And just kind of like that tapering jig from earlier, I lined the marks I made up with the edge of this plywood that I clamped onto my sled. In order to make sure that all the legs are cut the exact same, I screwed down some blocks to hold the leg tight and then made the cut. Now I just pop out the leg that I cut and drop in the next one and get the exact same angle. It's honestly a foolproof method. And while I cut down the rest of these legs, I want to let you know that we're also on Instagram at Spencley Design Co. We post tons of behind the scenes photos and videos of all the projects we're working on before they hit YouTube. So if that's something that you're interested in, check us out and, maybe consider following us. The other angled cuts on these legs are really no different. It's just a matter of accurately measuring everything and repositioning the blocks for the new angle on the sled. This last angle that needs to be cut on the lower eggs, however, requires a slightly different setup. So I removed the clamps from the crosscut sled and then ran that scrap piece of plywood through the table saw so its edge is exactly where the blade will cut again. I screwed down some more blocks to hold the leg in the perfect position, but also added a clamp, even though now looking back at the footage, I definitely could have just screwed down another block. I could then run all 4 of the legs through the table saw on the sled until they were exactly identical. Now the lower legs go together in 2 pairs, and to spice things up, I wanted to add a taper to the inside of the legs too. It's super easy to lose track of which side the leg needs to taper on, so I folded the 2 legs inward and marked where the taper goes. I then grabbed 2 legs that had the taper on the same side, and after marking out the start and stop points, I could secure them down to the DIY tapering sled again and run them through the saw. And now this is the whole reason I marked where to cut the taper on each leg. I have to flip 2 of the legs 90 degrees to make sure the taper is on the correct side. And with those lined up correctly, I could just run them through the saw just like the other legs. Wait. Back it up a second. Yeah, right there. Alright, so if you were watching closely, you probably noticed that my blade didn't cut all the way through the leg. You know, I guess I didn't factor that in, but no problem. I can just clean that up with a flush trim bit on the router. When I use my flush trim bit, I like to toss a small strip of painter's tape where the bearing rides, as I find it actually gives a cleaner cut. I don't know, maybe it's just these crappy router bits. With the lower legs all situated, I marked out where I needed to drill some dowel holes. I lined the index line on the viewer of this Rockler doweling jig to the mark I'd just made and drilled some holes for dowels. Now I'm definitely going overboard here, but I'd rather the table be over-engineered than fail after all the hard work I'm going to put into it. As I finish up drilling all these dowel holes, I want to ask you to consider to hit that like button down below. We're a super small channel and taking 1 second of your time helps boost this channel more than you know. No pressure, but if you're enjoying the video, we'd really appreciate it if you thought about it. Thanks! Over at the table saw, I cut down some 3/8 inch dowels and then used the chisel to shave some slots into them. What this does is allows the glue to move around in the hole and not cause a vacuum to form inside. I threw a little bit of wood glue inside of each of the holes and then spread it around with this really cool Rockler glue stick. And then all it takes to get these dowels in there is a little bit of twisting and then some light tapping with the hammer.
Just tap it in. Just tap it in. Give it a little tappy. Tap, tap, taparoo.
Over on the mating leg, I filled all the holes with glue and clamped the legs together. You'll probably notice these clamping blocks I'm using here. These are absolutely crucial for clamping angled joints. And check out the link in the description below if you want to see how I made these. They're super easy. While the glue on the lower legs sets up, I'll move to the upper legs. Just like before, I broke down some more walnut stock into oversized blanks on the crosscut sled. I could then rip those blanks down so that the edges are square. With the rough pieces broken down, I marked some lines where I wanted the tapers to stop and to start. And if you want to know what all these specific measurements are, as well as the step-by-step plans with detailed drawings, we have plans available linked down in the description below. Now these upper legs have multiple tapered cuts made on them, so I set up just like before by aligning the marks to the edge of the plywood sled, then screwing down some blocks to hold everything securely down in place. Because of the steep angle on this cut, I really couldn't support the board super well. I could hold it down with my hand, but the blade would come way closer than I was comfortable with, and my right thumb is actually my favorite finger, so I elected to just use a clamp instead. So I started out cutting the tapers on these 4 upper legs, paying special attention to make sure I didn't hit the clamp, and I was going super slow. It was during this last cut that I realized it had screwed something up. Big time. I honestly thought I was going to have to completely redo these pieces, but luckily I actually messed up by cutting these pieces too large. And even though I made plans, I guess I just decided not to read them. Luckily, I was able to just readjust the blocks on the sled to get the correct angle this time, and the block definitely was not secure. This piece needed to be securely held down so it didn't risk getting knocked backwards by the blade. So this time I just grabbed a scrap piece of plywood and screwed everything down to act as a clamp. This works super well. However, there was one mistake that scared me. The mic didn't pick it up super well, but the cutoff piece actually got stuck between the blade and the throat plate and made a giant bang. I honestly thought something inside the table saw broke. Now, I don't have a zero clearance insert, but come to think of it, that sounds like a great future video to make like a DIY version or something. But I put some painter's tape on the underside of the throat plate to prevent any cutoffs from getting trapped in there. Okay, so now we should be done with any of my mistakes. I am curious though, do you like to see the mistakes that I make and how I fix them? Let me know down in the comments below. The last cut we need to make on the upper legs is a super small one. It'll be a really nice detail where the upper leg meets the tabletop. And to be 100% honest with you, this is my first time trying out this technique of not worrying about angles and just kind of, cutting to the lines that I make on pieces, and I honestly love it. Definitely going to keep doing this again in the future. By now, the glue on the lower legs cured, and I took them out of the clamps and lined up the upper legs. Now these hieroglyphics marked on the legs are actually letters of the English alphabet. These archaic symbols help me remember which pieces need to mate up with one another. This doweling jig is about the strongest joint I can make with my current tool set. However, if you have something like a domino, you could dramatically speed up this process. But maybe that's just because this drill bit is incredibly dull. Yeah, this is real time. But I'm not going to subject you to watch all that, so we'll just fast forward. Just like joining the two lower legs, I separated the glue up into sections to make it easier. The first part is to fill the holes of the upper leg with glue, then twist in some dowels to spread the glue evenly around. I then added glue to the lower leg and joined the two pieces together. These dowel joints are definitely tight, but wiggling the pieces seemed to get them to set in very well. Again, these DIY universal clamping angle blocks are an absolute game changer and made the glue up completely stress-free. Now since this table is solid walnut, there's inevitably going to be some seasonal wood movement. I'm using these expansion washers from Lee Valley that will allow the table to expand and contract while still holding the legs on tightly. These legs are angled, so I need to drill out a mortise so that the washer can be hidden. I really wish I had a drill press, but I don't. So I just cut a scrap piece of wood at a complementary angle and removed the bulk with a Forstner bit, and then could come back to clean up the edges with a chisel. I then drilled a 1/4 inch hole through the center of the mortise, then flipped the legs over and routed out the rest of the opening with a 1/4 inch router bit. Before moving on to the stretchers, I want to add some adjustable feet to the bottom to make sure the table is stable no matter how uneven the floor is. I drilled a pilot hole and then twisted these Rockler threaded inserts into the bottom of the leg. Pro tip, use a bolt into the insert and then use an impact driver to twist the insert into place. Now, just thread on the leveling feet and the legs are finished, so let's move on to the stretchers. These stretchers are going to be made from some 5/4 walnut, and before I get to cutting ridiculous angles on them, I need to bring them down to their final length. And then rip them down to their final width. Now these stretchers are no different than the legs when I say that I have absolutely no clue what angles I'm cutting. I just find the beginning and end points and then cut to the line that I make. Now in order to get this first bevel cut, I need to tilt my blade to right about 20 degrees. A feather board is definitely required to make this cut, since it'll firmly hold the piece against the fence and prevent it from possibly getting kicked back by the blade. And with that giant bevel cut, I needed to cut this tiny part off too, so that this super small leg detail matches the top of the legs. Now in order to make sure that this cut creates an exactly 90-degree angle, I'm actually going to leave my blade at the exact same bevel and make geometry do the work here. And since we rotated our workpiece 90 degrees, we actually created a complementary angle and we now have a perfect 90-degree angle here. And here's what I mean about the stretcher matching the legs. The beveled cuts I made perfectly match the leg details. These stretchers are also going to be joined to the leg using some dowels. However, this method is going to be slightly different. I first marked out the outline of the stretcher onto the leg, and then used a drill bit to drill the first dowel hole. That little piece of painter's tape just makes sure I don't drill too far into the leg. With the holes drilled, I inserted some dowel centers, which will poke a small hole exactly where I need to drill the mating hole. Although these stretchers are small, they're still going to keep the table from swaying side to side and provide some essential support. It's a shame that we can't build stretchers to provide essential support to our channel, but there is something that you can do to support us. We just recently started our Patreon page, where we've got tons of unique benefits for all of our supporters. Maybe you want to get a shout out, or maybe plant a funny Easter egg in one of our videos. Our Patreon supporters get benefits like that alongside keeping this channel alive. We truly could not do any of this without everyone's support. So, if you're interested, check it out and see if it's the right fit for you. Thanks, let's move on to the tabletop. The tabletop is also going to be made out of 5/4 walnut. Now, this walnut was supposed to be surfaced on two sides, but someone must have had a few too many quarantine drinks. At least the guy ripping straight edges was awake though. After I cleaned up the opposite edge on the table saw, I laid out the board and marked some spots for some dowels. With the glue up of this size, these dowels are going to help a ton in making sure the boards stay aligned. I'm only using one side of the jig for this tabletop, so I covered the other marks with some painter's tape. I know there was 100% chance I would mess it up if I didn't cover up the other hole, so that's why the tape's there. Alright, so as evident by the music on the iPad, I spent about 25 minutes drilling these dowel holes. This is to show you that it is 100% feasible to use dowels in a glue up, but we will definitely be purchasing a domino sometime in the future to speed things like this up. And since this glue up is so big, I like to do a dry run to make sure that everything works out. And once I know that all the dowels fit, I start by gluing only the dowels in place, hoping that this will make things less stressful. And then we let the fun begin. So I'll let you actually eavesdrop on one of our riveting conversations while we glue up the top.
It's not a good way to start. You need to get the glue open. I feel like I need like a Mission Impossible song. Is that in the movie? Is that like the theme song, or is that like just what they play like when he's in trouble?
I don't know.
Honestly, I think I'm gonna put this board on and then stop. Alright.
Just to make sure that all the glue didn't cure before we got our clamps on, we ended up separating the glue up into two parts. But once all the glue dried, I used my most expensive Harbor Freight chisel to remove the excess squeeze out. The top has some pretty decent sized knot holes, and we need to stabilize those to prevent cracking over time. And most of these voids go all the way through the wood, so I put some sheathing tape on the underside to prevent the epoxy from bleeding out the bottom. We're adding a little bit of black pigment to the epoxy to make it blend in nicely with the walnut and look more natural than some crazy color. Now this specific epoxy that we're using just requires one pump of each component, stirring for a few minutes, and then I can use a syringe to inject epoxy into all the voids of the tabletop. And this particular epoxy recommends that heat be applied to help release the bubbles, so I just used a cheap heat gun to take care of that. About 24 hours later, the epoxy had cured and I could use the heat gun along with a putty knife to remove all the excess epoxy from the surface of the table. Looking for something else oddly satisfying? We got you covered on that too. Now we don't have a drum sander, so we have to do with this random orbit sander. However, I marked up the surface of the tabletop with a pencil to make sure that I'm sanding evenly. As soon as the pencil's gone, I move on. No more, no less. And we also don't have a track saw or a table saw with any decent size capacity, so I'm trimming down the tabletop to its final size with a circular saw. And to help get a cleaner cut, I just laid down some painter's tape over the cut line and used a straight edge to guide the circular saw. While I finish cutting the table down to its final size, I want to remind you to consider hitting that like button down below. That one click is a huge help to get our small channel out to more viewers. We have under 1,000 subscribers at the time of recording this video, and if you're enjoying this project, we would hope you would consider subscribing and helping us surpass that 1,000 mark. We put out new project videos every week, and we couldn't do it without your support. Thanks, and remember, there's no pressure. We're just happy you're here enjoying this video. Now that the table base has had plenty of time to dry, I set it on the tabletop and aligned it to some reference lines to make sure that it's centered on the table. I'm going to be attaching the base to the top using some threaded inserts. So I grabbed a small brad point bit to mark where the insert needs to be drilled, and then used another larger brad point bit to sit perfectly in the pinhole that I made. Then, just install the inserts the same way I did earlier on the bottom of the legs. And now we're at the point where I can set the expansion washer in place and thread on the bolt for a secure fit that will allow the tabletop to expand over time. And after all 4 inserts were placed on the tabletop and the base fit perfectly, I removed the base and focused on putting a nice profile on the underside of the tabletop. I got this massive 2 3/4 inch chamfer bit that was so large I actually had to make a custom base plate for it to fit through the opening at the bottom of my router. Bits this large can be dangerous, so I made sure to back down the speed to the manufacturer recommended setting, which is about the slowest setting that this router has. And although routing a chamfer on the edge might not seem like it's taking off a lot of material, this 60-degree profile actually removes a massive amount. To stay safe and mitigate the risk of tearing out a large piece of wood, I'm taking several shallow passes and slowly plunging to final depth. And while I route out this profile, I want to tell you that we're also on Instagram at Spencley Design Co. If you like to watch behind the scenes footage and see photos of all of our projects we're building before they make it here to YouTube, you might like what we're sharing. So if you're interested, consider checking us out, and if it's something you enjoy, we'd love to have you follow us. Now, one thing that we're a little reserved about is recommending products. Now, this is not a sponsored ad read. However, this is my first time using a white side router bit, and I have to say, I'm absolutely blown away. If you've ever used a router before, you know that they tend to throw fine dust everywhere. This bit is different though, in that it throws these large shavings that are super easy to clean up, and it leaves an insanely clean finish. I almost don't even have to sand this edge. A new piece of large furniture often feels like a turning point. If you've been following us for over our first 35 videos or so, you know this is a completely different style than anything we've built before. It's taken me some time to work out exactly what kind of things I enjoy building, and, well, this is it. I think this project is going to be a turning point for us and this channel. So I guess what I'm saying is, I want to start to explore things. I want to explore making unique furniture designs. I want to build things that are truly custom pieces that you won't find anywhere else. I want to challenge myself to innovate instead of replicate. And I guess what I'm saying is that I just want to gather all of my ideas and put them on the table.